So I guess I'll get started. My name is John Misak. I teach at the New York Institute of Technology in what used to be called the English department. That's now the Humanities department. So, lost 3 professors to early retirement. So the department kind of got small, and I guess in order to protect it, we made a bigger department. Don't ask me what subjects are in the Humanities department other than social sciences. I'm not sure what else is there. I think education. But it's strange. We all know when things change. It's a little interesting. So my students are mainly STEM students. And when I went to school, as I'm sure maybe you teach maybe English or anything else, you went to school, you always imagine how you'd be teaching students that were rapidly interested in literature, going to teach future writers. That's not the way I teach. At first, it was a bit jarring, but I learned to like STEM students who initially don't like writing classes. I've been told, I took this course because I have to, and I majored in engineering because I don't want to write, to which I'll chuckle and say, you're going to write anyway. The same way, one of my friends decided he didn't want to go to school, so he became an electrician, not understanding that in order to become a licensed electrician, you need to go to school. So watch out what you wish for, I guess. So I polled my students out of curiosity to see if they really thought there was value in these introductory literature classes. And the answer was yes. This is anonymous, roughly 90 students that I polled. Hi, how are you? And these are all STEM students, medical students, engineering students, computer science students, and a lot of them thought that it was important, but they also reject them any chance they get. So the other question I asked is, would incorporating technology into the course help? And as you can see, roughly the same percentage. I was able to do a deeper dive with some students on these questions, and even the 31% in the previous slide that said that they didn't see value in it, they didn't mean that they didn't think they should take them. That was just more, they don't like them. And that with this change, that number would be a little bit higher. So I was a video game journalist for a long time. I reviewed video games, which sounds like a dream job. It's a nightmare. It is, because you have to review bad games and play them to the end. It's like watching bad movies, but not as good, because at least bad movies can be campy and be made fun of. Whereas bad video games, I guess, could too. What I made my living doing, I think I compared pumping gas to playing a video game, and pumping gas was compared positively to the video games it's created. So when I'm in my classes and I say things like, we're going to discuss story structure or narrative structure or anything like that, students think along these lines. Just a menu of boredom, dull, long, complex, comes with a side of forever. That's Hamlet to them. And some of these are quotes from my students. Particularly arose for Emily. This is what a student had said, which I thought was good. And I asked if I could borrow it, and they said yes. I said, I'm not going to attribute it. They said they don't want to be attributed anyway. So, and the 3 question marks, nobody understands metamorphosis. At least my students. That's what they claim, until of course they do. But it was something that I've struggled with. And when students are assigned Hamlet, this is what they run to. Hi. I'm just going on about how students complain about reading Hamlet in literature. So when students are assigned, we're going to, a narrative analysis, they tend to run to these things. Spark notes. My friend Cliff, who I think gets a bad rap. We're going to talk about that. Or they go and watch the Mel Gibson version of Hamlet, which I don't think he does such a bad job, but it's a horrible movie in terms of understanding the plot if you're going to be or write a paper on the plot of Hamlet, because it twists a lot of it. Those of you who aren't familiar, Fortinbras isn't there, a major character. It really plays up the Oedipal connection between Hamlet and his mother to the point of cringiness, if you've seen it. But anyway, or Wikipedia, again, something I think gets a bad rap. I'm a proponent of Wikipedia. I think it's great that students go there and then look at the references at the bottom to find out more information. Do they do that? At least not like some students too much. Teacher comment on top in relation to Spark Notes, Cliff Notes, and all that. Our constant battle as teachers is to make assignments where reading the book is necessary. Because what do students do? If I assign them Hamlet, what's the first thing they're going to do? What do you think?
Look for a summary of Hamlet.
Yes, one of those summaries. And if they're really studious, what might they do instead? As opposed to reading.
Listen to it.
Skimming, if they listen to it, watch it, they probably watch the movie. I assigned Mystic River, a novel, and the students watch the movie. And I know it because the last name changes of one of the detectives. So they refer to the detective in the movie as opposed to the book, although I'm guilty of that too, but I'm not being great at they are. The second one, it's a lot better to actually read the book and then do the spark notes, but there's not enough time in the day for that. And I, of course, can speak to my students for days on end about time management and how they never seem to have time for my class, but they have time for other classes. I'm sure the other professors hear the exact same thing. And by the way, if you're getting the vibe that I don't like my students, it's totally not the case. I'm just sarcastic. They are great. I do enjoy teaching them, but I do get a lot of, I couldn't do your work because I had to do a major project for this class or that class. And I tell them, don't treat me like a Tuesday night date. And what does that mean? Well, Friday night you go out with your main squeeze, Saturday night you go out with your friends, Sunday's football, Monday's football, Wednesday's interesting night most places, Thursday's ladies night. What's Tuesday? Nothing. It's when you call somebody up and go, hey, what are you doing? And they go, what do you mean by that? I said, well, dating joke aside, don't tell me that you can't do my work more than once in a semester because you had to do another class as well. I said, come up with a better excuse. I want to go out on Friday night too. I want to be taken out to dinner. I don't want to be the late night call. Because it's usually about 11 o'clock at night when the assignment's due at midnight that I get an email saying that they can't finish it because they had other stuff. I try. So they don't have time. But no, that's National Lampoon's Vacation. Why am I saying that? Because Cliff Notes and Spark Notes by themselves in isolation is hamburger helper without the meat, which cousin Eddie famously serves to Clark, and it's terrible. And Cliff Notes gets a bad rap.
The book is difficult, so you just have the Cliff Notes to get the gist.
We are a happily married couple, aren't we?
Yes. But there are dark undercurrents to our relationship that neither of us is willing to acknowledge.
Empire Pictures proudly presents the film adaptation of one of America's all-time most popular novels, Cliff Notes.
Again, they get a bad rap. If you ever saw the movie Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt is supposed to read Dante. Instead, he gets the Cliff Notes. And again, they're great. They're written by professors. They're written by experts, but they are only summaries. But there's value to them. At least that's my argument. And again, this question of how and battle to make assignments where reading the book is necessary. So how do we do that? And what my partner and I came up with was a game that introduces the elements of Hamlet to students to get them interested in it. Because the funny thing now is they don't even want to read the Cliff Notes and they don't even want to read the Spark Notes. They want to just get the very basics of it because students will tell you, and I'm sure, again, if you're teachers, you know this, and if you're students, you know this, they say they don't read, but they read all the time. So it's not a matter of not wanting to read in general, it's a matter of not wanting to read what's assigned. And that's caused me to really take a look at what I assign and question that, and I should, but at the same time, I see value in something like Hamlet to students because students can relate to what Hamlet is going through. Whether it be the trauma that he's going through, whether it be the coming of age that he's going through, I think it's very relatable even 400 years later. And I want to impart that in a way where students will understand it. So our goal was to encourage reading, not replace it. Because in video, you watch the movie. Who's going to watch the movie of Hamlet, particularly the 4-hour one, and then go and read the book? Be silly. It's double work. So if we could create something that was maybe a 15 to 20-minute experience where students could navigate the play and have questions, that could lead them to reading, but we'll get to that in a second. Here are the benefits of games. They're not timeless mind wasters anymore. I'll show you a quick video of narrative games to get an idea of what I'm shooting for. And about 83% of U.S. college-age people that play video games. And the player of video games is no longer the boy in the basement that it was, or at least considered to be in a sense. See, I never understood that because I had game consoles when I was a kid. I had 3 sisters, and I had to fight with them to get on the game console. So I never understood that signal. But now everybody plays games for the most part. They play different types of games. Some people identify as gamers because they play games on their phones, and hardcore gamers will laugh at that and say that's not really gaming. I say it is, but I probably get through arguing with people about that. There's higher engagement with games than there is reading versus watching. Another poll that I did of about 300 students, I found that students read 40% of the time, and when given a movie to watch on their own, about 70% of them watched it. So we're still losing 30%. Games could possibly increase that, and that's the question. Can they increase and serve as an accessible entryway to literature? You play a game based on Hamlet, does that increase the odds that they'll read it? And that's the answer. It depends on the games. That's not going to do it. There's nothing there. Nor is this. I purposely made sure there's no actual killing going on the screen. This is somebody shooting a gun. This is a very popular game called Counter-Strike that's been around for a long time. Is this the kind of game that's going to get students into literature? No, because please tell me, because I don't know, I've been playing Counter-Strike for 10 years. What's the story behind it? Why am I there? And the answer is, I don't know. Other than to be on the mic with my friends and make fun of them, and they make fun of me when we kill each other. That's it. Or when we group together and then, chat with other people and go back and forth. So instead, narrative games. I'll show you a little bit of a video on, hope the volume is not too loud. This is a montage of, over the last, maybe it's 20 years, but about 20 years of, now almost 30 really, narrative video games. Uncharted is a fairly famous one on the PlayStation, where it was sold as an interactive movie. Classic Nintendo 64 game called GoldenEye that set up all the first-person shooters that exist today. Final Fantasy, I believe that's 10. And all these have characters and stories that, for the most part, you care about as a player. You want to know what's going on. You want to tell them this next better. Basically about a whole bunch of characters coming together and facing an impossible suicide mission. You'll see this. An uncountable amount of ships that they're going to have to somehow defeat. Here's the war. Many of these games are what are considered shooters, but they have a story behind them. Walking Dead, not a shooter, Adventure game. I think this is Red Dead Redemption 2. And where a lot of these games, you have to figure out why you need to do the things that you're doing as opposed to just mindlessly doing them. And students come into my classroom with this experience. And without sometimes knowing it, this is their idea of story. And when they look at Hamlet, when they look at Hemingway, or they even look at modern literature, even Mystic River that I've signed, they don't see the connection. Some do. I don't mean to play with such a broad brush, but I think initially they look at this and say, well, that's not what I'm used to. Or I don't know how to analyze a story. You've been analyzing stories for as long as you've been holding a controller in your hand. And these days, that might be from the age of 3 on. Star Wars. This is one of my favorite games, Detroit Become Human, where you play as 3 different androids, and the androids are glitching and becoming sentient. And you would help or hinder that process. So you get the gist. I'll show it all up for time. That's another one of my favorites too. That's Zelda. So knowing this experience that students have with games, my partner, he's just recently retired, but he was a teacher at NYT as well. And we'd had a discussion about how hard it is to teach Hamlet, how much of a pushback we get from anything like Hamlet, Macbeth. Othello sometimes is okay because there's a fairly modern movie that was based on it that students might understand, but even that's starting to become dated now. And I said, yeah, once they get into it, they really like it, but it's that first step. It's like my father trying to get me to eat Chinese food for the first time, or egg foo young's what he wanted me to eat, and it just didn't look like anything I'd ever had before. And he said, you're going to like it. You like eggs, you like chicken, that's all that's in it. I'm like, no, I don't like the way it carries itself. I'm not going to eat it. And it's the same thing. They don't like the way Hamlet carries itself because they hear the language. Language is one of the biggest barriers. And they've heard people reference Hamlet. They don't understand how many references they make that come from Hamlet, but at the same time, they don't realize that it's accessible. They just see this barrier, and it's us that, we're trying to break that. So here's a little demo of what Perchance looks like. It's in prototypical state right now. Starts with an opening crawl that gives them an idea of where they are. They're a member of the acting troupe that comes to perform the play that Hamlet is creating. Interactive text, again, is all prototypical. That night has already been changed into a 3D model just 2 years ago. And what we're doing is we're having students play the game as part of almost like an internship, and then they tell us what questions they really want to answer. Because the first mistake that I made is I made the game for professors. My interest, my partner's interest. That was some of the big mistakes. So the idea is you go to the ramparts, you beat the Hamlet, and the ghost appears. And the main focus of this game is for students to decide whether or not the ghost is real, and also whether or not Hamlet believes it's real. Yes, sure, sorry. Yeah, there's no need for that sound at all, actually. So just get rid of it. And this is the end part here, where students will be asked questions, and then we'll get feedback on that. But my first mistake, and as a game reviewer, it was a horrible mistake to make. I made a game that wasn't fun. And nobody is going to play a game that isn't fun. The greatness of games gets completely eradicated if they're not fun. People don't want to play games as work. And that's the thing. If you want to say you can make work fun, yes, that's true. Go all the way back to painting the fence in, is that Huckleberry Finn or is that Tom Sawyer? Tom Sawyer, right. Painting the fence in Tom Sawyer where he convinces somebody to do it because it's fun. Yeah, that's possible, but students aren't going to play a game based on Hamlet. That's not fun. They might play a video game that's not fun, might get fooled into it, and you don't want to fool students. Maybe a little bit to get them into the game, but not so much. So we had to revamp everything. The original one was just a 3D model of Elsinore Castle where you could inspect things and find really cool stuff out about, let's say, the cultural implications of Hamlet and the rules that were going on. That's something that we found students struggled with, but don't care about initially. You'll care about it once you get engaged with the play, but you don't care about what the cultural implications are of the 13th, 17th century, because it kind of straddles both of them. Once you start talking about 13th and 17th century, you start to lose students immediately. But if you start talking about how a son who was mourning the death of his father is now told that his father's ghost is walking the earth, and he might be able to talk to it, you might have something. And is it a hallucination? How many of you are familiar with Hamlet? I don't want to. Okay, so you all good. Okay, so is it a hallucination, the ghost, or is it real? And in the hallucination, in the realness, is there a hallucination in the realness? Because there's one part where only Hamlet is there. What will happen in the game, I don't know if you saw it quickly, after you see the ghost, a video will play of the interaction between Hamlet and the ghost, where he speaks to him. And that's where the students then get to decide, is this real or is it not? I mean, it just so happens Hamlet is upset with his uncle, and now the uncle's the bad guy. And it just so happens that Hamlet has a strong attachment to his mother, and is upset what's going on, is upset with her. And now maybe he might imagine his father is coming because he's mad at his mother. But, and I don't want to get too much into that debate because we can talk about that forever, there's also a war going on. And the characters will tell the player that there's a war going on. You can ask questions about the war, and what do you think about it? Oh, Claudius has them outwitted, or Fortinbras is dangerous. I don't trust the Norwegians. And then when you start talking about battles and you start talking about interactions that way, students perk up a little bit. What we want to do is make this scalable to many different stories, but also scalable by student input to see what they want to do. We don't want any killing going on, even though there's killing in Hamlet, let that be in the play itself, but we want more exploration. So what our back end will be able to do is see what areas students are visiting and which ones they're not, which conversations they're speeding through and which ones they're paying attention to. It's a little bit advanced, we're getting there, but that's the main goal. So that's what I find is the compelling element, because what we can find out through that data, we can analyze the data, we can find out where the problem areas are. We can find out where students have questions, they don't understand something. You showed me this whole thing. I know there's a war going on, but why do you keep saying that the guards are so jumpy? Because I think that's one of the most overlooked parts of the play, the very beginning. When we see the guards, they're just, what? Oh, who's there? Why are you so jumpy? And it's because there's a war going on, and it's because they think they're seeing the ghost. Also, students don't catch sometimes right away the fact that the ghost is wearing armor and what that means. They also might not understand that if somebody kills your father, by the rules of what's going on in the Hamlet universe, it is the son's job to kill that person. And the person who's keenly aware of that is Claudius. I tell my students, if you steal my tablet, the only person in the room that knows for sure that you stole it is you. I know it's missing. I'm going to find out eventually, hopefully. I'm going to find out who took it. But you are the one that knows. Claudius knows what he did and is waiting for Hamlet or somebody else to find out. That is where the intrigue can become interesting, and that's why we want Claudius to have a little bit of a bigger role in this. We want to do sort of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, where we have a universe going on, and yet we're doing things in that universe that didn't happen without changing the plot. Because we got major kickback, even from students, that if we created an alternate universe here, would that work? And they said no, it would confuse them. I just learned how to code some things. I taught myself how to game code a little bit, and I got a little lost in that. You have to pull yourself back and say, okay, this is not for you. This is not a toy for you. This is a learning tool and a toy. So here's the data this is simple data we come up with. It's a Google form where we can see what students are answering. And there'll be different questions here. For one, we'll see. But when I teach Hamlet, or when I teach anything, I like to shift how I teach it based on the 25 students that are in my class. So if I have a class that really truly believes Hamlet saw the ghost, I might act as the devil's advocate in that particular lesson and give the arguments for why he might not be there, or the reverse, and enable them to do that. And we have them give information of why they think what they think. Not only is the ghost there, why is it there? And in the future, what we want to do is we want to set a framework together where students will get this data too, and it'll feed a paper for them. Now they'll go into the play with these presuppositions of what they think, and then search the play to either support it or not. Which, of course, going in with an angle sometimes isn't always the best, but I think anything that inspires reading helps the student themselves learn, and they control this learning. I think that's one of the most important things about hearing fancy quotes. People who say that games are great when it comes to learning, and it is true. And I like the first one. Students feel personally embodied in the game. Their actions in the game are intrinsically motivated. And what we will do eventually is create an avatar system where students can create their alternate, personality in the game as opposed to a standard character. Right now we have no character. It's just first person. Eventually we'll make it third person. And then what we can do with that is have students create something of the time period and then choose what they want to choose by that time period. Much like what Polonius tells his son about be careful how you dress. How you dress dictates who you are, which of course is the total opposite of what we do in our society. We drive Mercedeses that cost more than our rent, whereas this time period, you'll wear a $1,000 suit because you have a credit card to buy it, but you're not really, are we present? I like the idea of people wearing what they want, but at the same time, if I were to roll up in a really expensive Armani suit and a really expensive Mercedes, people think I have a lot of money. And that's something that happens in Hamlet. And what I love when I say that to students is they argue with me on it, and they should. Because they say today's society is different. That, yes, we wear $1,000 sneakers, but I also take those sneakers and sell them and buy new sneakers. So I never really spend that $1,000. I can make money back. My nephew makes money on sneakers, used sneakers. Fascinating. Absolutely. I'm like, how do you, first of all, I need to know how you do this because I have tons of sneakers I can sell. He goes, no, yours are worth nothing. I'm like, thank you. And then I want to know how you did it. But so what that does is that helps students kind of understand the differences, but let them create an avatar, and then that avatar that they create will dictate who they are presenting to be. And because they're actors, they're pretending to be actors, they can get away with it. In this time period, they can dress as a king if they want to. And in the future, far in the future, I would want the character to be treated differently based upon how they're dressed. And they'll see different responses based upon what they're wearing. And that gives them a little insight into this. Because again, maybe if I rolled up in a Mercedes and a suit, nobody would say anything. I tell my students, if I showed up in a hoodie and joggers, and trying to dress like I'm 19, like that. I said, you'd notice that if I walked into class dressed that way, she wouldn't look right. I said, so that might be the difference. But other than that, we are free to wear what we want. And I think it's one of the greatest freedoms that we have. So games and study guides, the hopes here, increase student participation, develop narrative curiosity, facilitate active learning, encourage and supplement reading, let them go back to the game after. They can read first and go to the game if they want to. Analyze student interaction, these are the best. Where are the problem points, where are we seeing positivity, and how can we create better learning opportunities as we learn from what students are telling us. And they don't have to raise their hand in class, which I find students don't like to do. How many of you are teachers? Have you noticed a decrease in student participation? Yes, I did a study on this, and I found that the number one reason why students don't speak in class is because they don't want to be told they're wrong. I said, you mean like meanly wrong? No, I just don't want to be wrong, period. I said, that's not a good way to live. Be wrong. You're going to be wrong more than you're right. Except when I'm talking to my wife, I always say I'm wrong more than I'm right. The joke with me and my wife is I'm always right, which of course is 100% not true. As a matter of fact, that statement is my first wrong statement. But it's been a running game for us. I think I told her my percentage is 97%, to which she laughs. She was mean wrong. But anyway, they don't want to speak. So I use Google Docs in class and let them type their answers in class, which is a great tool. So I'll ask the question, they all type at the same time, it's on the screen, you see all this typing going on. You see students on their phones actually doing something useful. And what it prevents is, if I ask a question and this person answers, and this person over here had a similar feeling, they won't speak because it sounds like this person said it already. But when they write it, they get to say it and realize that what they had to say is similar, but the nuance is so much different. And you get the voices of all students. That's what I want in this game, too. I want every student to react to what happens. And I want students to see other students' reactions anonymously so they can understand what they see and what others see and position themselves amongst that. And of course, some thanks. My dean, my chair, that's my partner here, and this is our coder who has to constantly undo the mistakes that I make because I get all excited and start doing things. And then he says, okay, I have to fix that. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? Please feel free. I know I probably said a lot, so. Yes.
I think the idea of customizing the character
Mhm.
is
Thank you.
like
Okay.
I just think it's with my sister, like, she gets really engaged with games when customization is an option.
Right.
Even with games that generally just appeal to me and my brother, when customization is an option, she gets really involved in them.
Okay.
So I think that's especially a smart decision.
Well, yeah, and I think you can just extrapolate that to creative minds.
Yeah.
And it just enables that. And I think my students, STEM students, are craving creativity. They don't have it in their coursework. They want to take creative writing classes, but they can't fit into their schedule. So to be able to create something here, picking up on what you're saying, I think that would be great. You have a question?
Yeah, there's a game that you may be aware of called Elsinore.
Yes.
Yeah, is that something that you looked at all when making this? And I know you also said that exploring alternate versions of a story isn't necessarily something that was helpful for your goals as far as getting students to understand the text.
Right.
Do you think it's useful for getting students to understand if they're already interested or acquiring an interest or exploring the themes and dynamics and character interactions of the story? Can that be useful?
Yes, I think it can. We found Elsinore a little late, and I got scared at first. I'm like, did somebody beat us to the punch? And I found that it's a completely different take, and there's plenty of room for a lot of takes here. But yes, I think that for my students who need an entryway into the actual play, I think our design is better for that. But Elsinore is good for somebody who's maybe seen Hamlet or read Hamlet and is interested in that universe itself and want to explore it in different ways. So I think that opens up a lot of opportunities. Or English majors, I think it serves a greater purpose for. But I wouldn't say that there's anything wrong with Elsinore. And if we weren't designing a game, I might use it. And I actually have. I've told students to play it. There was a text game that I had students play that was a little different, a little simple. But yeah, Elsinore, I think, They did a great job with it. I downloaded it and was jealous almost immediately. And then I thought what I could copy from it, without copying. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a version of the question I'm asking everybody here.
Okay.
When I go back to the high school where I teach and try to tell people about these ideas, and the wall immediately goes up and they say, "Oh wait, video games? Oh no, I don't want to turn my students into gamers." And all of the great discussions that we have here, poof into dust.
Right.
I'm sure you faced that situation.
Sure.
What do you do?
Well, one thing you do is you have to just take a breath, I think, because you know it's coming. And if you really feel strongly about it, you have to find I think everybody's different in their refusal, but it's sort of like saying, I don't want young people to look at screens. You can do it, but students, I'm not going to turn my 12-year-old student into a screen watcher. Well, that 12-year-old student already is a screen watcher. How can you use the screen to help the class? When people created books, it was like, no, it's a narrative verbal tradition. A book is or movies. When we watch movies, people said, movies are terrible art. You can't have students watch movies. I mean, when I went to school even, movies were considered the cheap way of doing things. Or Spark Notes, Clip Notes, as I said, they're not cheap ways of doing things. They're created by professors. And students are already using the Cliff Notes. How can we use the Cliff Notes to get them into the stories? And if your goal is interactivity, I think people think the old way is always the best way. But just talk to them about outdoor versus indoor plumbing. What was better? And do I want to compare reading to video games as outdoor plumbing to indoor plumbing? No, I don't mean it that way. But what I'm saying is, for every argument like that, the answer is always, there's a purpose here. And games can be bad. Phones can be bad. If we took phones and brought them back to 1880, how long would it be before these people craned their necks? And, and the car was a bad innovation, people thought. The funny thing about cars really quickly is there were no street lamps, there were no street lights and stop signs when we first had cars, because horses didn't crash into each other. People do. So it's not the technology, it's how it's used. That's at least my argument.
Yeah, you have to look at the student learning outcomes you want from kids learning Hamlet. You can talk to teachers about that. They're comfortable in that zone, right?
Yeah.
And using universal design for learning, saying maybe that's not the way you learned about Hamlet, but it's good to differentiate for these kids. And so you need to be comfortable with them learning in ways that maybe you didn't.
And
Good teachers, I think, hear that more
Right.
than let's play video games or let's all get out and
Yeah, it sounds like if you start using the language of education.
Yeah.
of course, with anybody, meet them where they are. And I
And
think they
Ham-
are in student learning.
Hamlet is supposed to be performative. If I brought Shakespeare here, reading the play is blasphemy.
Yeah.
And what we're reading might not even be the actual version he would want us to read anyway. It's been edited. The Mel Gibson version of Hamlet, he would, I think, be appalled at. He might appreciate it, the iteration, but playing is a performative act. And
Roger Travis is, he's here at a conference than him. He's written a lot about that. The bardic tradition is not a fixed thing. Right? It's enacted and differently with every audience.
right,
So appreciating that the video game approach can do that. He calls it practomime, right? This idea of enacting.
right.
You could explore that, and I think history of social studies and language arts teachers all hear that.
Yeah, again, as you said, getting the goal is the learning outcomes. Now, it's not by any means necessary. I think there are some limitations there. Like, I wouldn't really want violent games having too much of a place in my classroom. But then again, I teach detective fiction, which is all about murder. So I think
Why would you eschew anything that's violent?
not anything that's violent. What I mean is violent games that are violent for violence sake, as opposed to violent games that have a purpose. Like Grand Theft Auto, I think, has a great social commentary built into a massive narrative game that is extremely violent. So I'm fine with that. But a game that I showed before, like Counter-Strike, which is just going around shooting without much in the way of story, I might eschew that in favor of a more narrative
Do you
explorative
think
game.
that impacts kids psychologically? Is that?
No, I think people think it does, to be honest. I've written an article on how I think that, there was a movie called Money Train where there was a guy in a subway booth, token booth, and they put gasoline on him and lit him on fire. Somebody did that in real life. But it doesn't mean that that's a connection. It just means they would have done something else. But I know it's a fine.
Correlated, but not causal.
Right, but I think especially, in the wake of what's been going on, I think some people are sensitive. So I try to be more sensitive. I don't like when students don't tell me that something bothered them. So I try to avoid that when possible. I know they're adults.
In public schools, teachers are a public entity.
Right. Yeah, so it's just, now if a student wants to play that on their own and they're of age and that's what they want to do and they want to write a paper on a game that has violent overtones to it, that's fine. The same way, I mean, our movies are as violent as can be, so. But then again, for instance, when I show the movie Seven, I do edit some of it out because there are some shocking things there that aren't necessary. So that's sometimes what I'll do. And it's just a line that I cross, and I guess, big news too, I just got tenure a couple of days ago, so I guess thank you. That pre-tenure feeling of I've got to watch every little thing that I do, not that I'm now going to just cast it all away, but I think, getting the PhD and then going through all that was a long process, so I'm still kind of unwinding from that. But yeah, everybody's like, now you can do what you want. I said, I kind of have been doing what I want, I just am careful about it. Any other questions, by the way? Yeah.
I just have quite a question. I really like your angle of we want to get Hamlet or we want to get students in the writing and actually like reading it. Whereas like I feel like someone would look at a video game and sort of like look at it as a replacement, like trying to get them to like, oh, play this game instead of Hamlet, instead of having to read it. And so that's already getting me thinking about like, oh, what ways could I like, get something to instead incorporate in with the writing of Hamlet. I think that's really cool.
And I think that was inspired by some other people that I can't attribute because I don't remember who they were. Just other teachers that had told me, for instance, they show clips of other movies that are parallel to Hamlet to sort of ease them in, like The Lion King can have some of those. So just showing that dynamic and saying, well, this exists in here, and then go find it. And sometimes that works. And that's what the goal was. The goal was to create something where students afterwards start talking. Because I noticed whenever I had students play a game in class, the talk afterwards was very engaged. And I had students the traditionally quiet students, I couldn't keep quiet. The stereotypical gamer, let's say, that stays quiet, that I caught playing a game against his friend, across the room. And how did I figure it out? One person slammed his hand on the desk, and the other one was sitting back with a very, pleased look on their face. They were playing, it was a PSP back in the day, that's what we're doing. And I said, I want to incorporate this into the class, not now, but when stories were discussed, they were a little quiet. When games were discussed, I couldn't keep them quiet. So I wanted to meld those two together. Plus my love of video games also fed that, but never to take, like you said, take away from the reading, because there is value in imagining it yourself. And I tell them, you are the director of the movie when you read the play yourself. You get to decide what Hamlet looks like. You get to decide what Elsinore looks like. If you play this game and you don't like what Hamlet looks like in it, well, when you read, change that. And you can make Hamlet whatever you want in that regard. There are certain things maybe you can't do, but I would like to push against canon as much as possible and say, this is the most interpreted play I think ever written, if not the most interpreted piece of literature ever written. There are plenty of opinions, because students will say, well, what do I need to know? You need to read it and find out for yourself. And that experience helps them, what I tell them, it helps them when you're a doctor and you're listening to patients, that you don't listen to each patient and hear the same thing over and over, that you hear what they have to say and take each situation differently. You learn to analyze. When both people say, I'm feeling pain, you understand that person A is feeling pain differently than person B. And by listening, maybe you can treat them better. Because they always tell me, what does literature have to do with my job? I said, well, coding is writing. You have to write. And me designing this game, some of it myself, taught me that. Because I learned that coders have their own little narrative within the code that they speak to each other. And that's a form of interaction. So now I have students, instead of writing paper, some of them write code. And now I understand some of it. They're way above my pay grade. Yes.
Do you have any, I know this has like a lot of technical sophistication, but like, have you had any design ideas maybe this makes that collaborative work?
When you say collaborative.
Like, just involve multiple
Players. It's something that we discussed. How can we put a social element into it? And one of the ways we thought about doing that is having a communal area, if we ever get this online, and have students go out on quests related to the story of Hamlet. So in other words, the quest would be to find something that uncovers a little bit of background. Like in other words, you see what's happening on the play, but just the way Hamlet says, I'm too much in the sun, and we think sun when he really means S-O-N. How can we add layers to what's being said and what's happening where students can understand it a little better? Maybe a quest to do that. Yes, and I know you have a question too. Okay.
I think it's interesting that you brought that up because as soon as you did, it reminded me of how you can leave notes for people.
Right.
And I think leaving citations while you're reading for other people to find.
That's a good idea.
Different take on your experience.
I think I'm going to steal. Yeah, the idea that a student, instead of saying John was here, we'll say, I think this means this.
Right.
And then,
Moderate that then, and upvote and downvote those.
sure,
Elden Ring lesson.
yeah,
Yeah, I think you have to.
you have to.
Be self-moderating.
And maybe a little bit of, and the problem is we need, if professors are going to use this, we need some that might be savvy in games. We want to make it so they don't have to be, but something like that, you might want to not have students misunderstand by something that's there, but
Introduce all of this.
then again, Wikipedia fixes itself. If I want to go on Richard Nixon's page and change his middle name, it gets fixed in a second.
Useful.
Yeah. It used to, you said? Yeah, not so much anymore? Yeah, agreed. Any other questions? Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, so you said previously that, relative to students' emotions. And I think that's like a really great, is that all of writing, in my experience, is really effective when you make it relevant to people's emotions. And students really get, involved when it's relative to. So how did you personally come to that conclusion in the classroom?
Mainly years of teaching and listening, and also finding out that when I had students write things that were attached to them, something they felt strongly about, the work was 10 times better. Instead of that prompt that I would give them, which I thought was pretty good, it was what I was taught. I found that if I let them create their own prompts and let them write about what they want to write about. We want to write about Hamlet? Well, I like this part of it. Okay, but I really saw this, one student said, I saw this Korean play that I think is based on Hamlet a little bit, but it's derivative more than anything else. Can I write about that? Sure. Let me try it. Let me see what happens. And what I found was they were emotional about it. They really like the way they're emotional about games. They get really excited about games. They love games. They hate games. They love to hate games. It's all that. And the emotion, even when I was talking about playing Counter-Strike, the emotion of playing with a friend and mainly just having fun. Like me and my friends will go in and play games and we'll just crack jokes on people, but nothing. Yeah, the connection. We would just, if someone even tries to say a word, we'll say, why don't you calm down? You're getting overheated. And it takes people about 2 times to realize that we're joking with them. And then they join in on the fun. And then strangers have fun. So the game becomes a positive emotional experience. So how can I found Ophelia, by the way, to be the most compelling character to students because there's so much mystery around her and there's emotion around her. Why is she the way she is? Why does she treat Hamlet the way she does? Sometimes they don't catch, the father's, sort of control. And I found that if I let students write the love story of Hamlet, between Hamlet and Ophelia, it became something that they enjoyed. So I took my emotions that I experienced during games, and I said, how can I put this into a game? And again, our prototype right now doesn't do that yet, but the one in my head does, and that's where we're trying to get to.
I feel like that's going to be.
That's what I have the students for too. It's not my emotions, it's theirs. I feel things when I see Hamlet, whether it be it taking me back to when I was an undergrad, whether it be the first time I taught it or the first time I saw a particular movie. That's great, but that's irrelevant to the experience. What's relevant is what emotions students might feel. Now, if those two intersect, that's great. But one of the things I have to learn is it's my project, but it's not for me. I'll play it like I would read a book that I wrote, but there's really why would I read a book I wrote, other than to pat myself on the back, or worse, look at it and go, wow, I wrote that? A student actually came in with one of my books one day, and I said, oh, so you're the one, borrowing from Robin Williams. But yeah, so it's a goal to have this collaborative before it's even completely built. And it already has been. We've probably had about 150 to 200 student testers. And most of them, I would say 95% of them, are just super engaged in it. And other ones are like, you know what, games aren't my thing. I thought they would be, but they're not. That's the 5% pretty much. And that's going to happen. But the other ones are just, yeah, when is this coming out? Why didn't you have this when you taught me Hamlet? So hopefully that continues. And again, hopefully it's seen not as something that's a cheapened way of learning Hamlet, but instead a way to get them into that door of reading. Did you have a question?
I want to be respectful of your time. I do want to get back into this at some point in the next 3 days, not the violence and that Hamlet is a suicide trigger in some ways. And,
Sure.
and you're talking about attaching things to people's emotions again and
Mhm.
using that to learn. That's a dangerous flame to light in middle schoolers and high schoolers these
Right,
days.
yeah, no, that's why the main focus,
And yet you eschew violence in video games, but the Iliad's full of violence and
sure,
Hamlet is imagined violence. So I'm kind of curious if it's
it's
just,
even more than imagined, it's actual violence.
well, in
Yeah.
the Iliad, it's described
Oh, of course.
graphically, right?
Right.
And not so much in Hamlet.
No,
But,
I mean, there's
I
killing of
wonder if
Polonius.
that's what you're parsing out is the
No, I meant,
graphic visuals?
yes, yes, and again, like there's a game called Postal 2, Postal 3, that were really just parodies of violent games that are just super over the top violence with no reason. Polonius being killed behind the arras, there's a reason for it, and we can explain it. Whereas Hamlet's not on a murderous
Right,
rampage.
it's not gun violence. Again,
Yeah.
I just think we can talk about it.
Of course.
Right? This is, let everybody else.
Sure.
Chat about it.
Any other
I just
questions?
want to follow up on what you were saying about that incredible idea about leaving notes within the game.
Yes.
That idea starts to push what's kind of like a virtual space designed more for like entertainment learning closer to a virtual learning space, almost like what Google Classroom is. Like I live in Google Classroom. I'm more home there than IRL. And it's a crappy video. It has leaderboards, it has live scorekeeping, it has missions, it has objective lists. Google Classroom is a real piece of crap video game that we're forcing.
I hate to tell you, real classrooms are the same game.
It's true, but this is a virtualized version of that same game, so it reads more gamey to them. And has anyone here like heard of any thinking or projects of leaning into that concept? Take what we're doing in Google Classroom, make a damn game, make an avatar, make it like a Super Nintendo looking pixel art thing that you don't click your assignment, you walk to your assignment. You see your classmates wandering around like it could be 11 o'clock at night, you're at home doing your homework. Hey, you're logged in doing your homework too. Is this something someone else is doing?
There's a couple of technologies that they're taking the Zoom element of online learning and trying to make that more engaging, and one of them was called Engagely, interestingly enough. Another is InSpace, Engagely with an I.
Thank you.
But I don't, and maybe someone else can comment, because I've been doing research on learning technologies. It's part of one of the committees I'm on.
What was that second one?
Second one is InSpace.
InSpace, thank you.
And you can walk up to a table and see other people there, and you can interact, and I can have screens at each table that students can then go to. It's almost like a virtual conference, but a real conference. So I think that should be scaled to what you're talking about. I think what you have is a good idea. What you want is a virtual learning space that we've been promised, I don't know, for 30 years, for 25 years. I mean, I was on the board, the committee for my school to switch our LMS from Blackboard to Canvas, and I found out that the Blackboard utilization rate was 30% at a tech school. And when they were told they had to put their syllabus online, they didn't want to because they hadn't changed it. They said they asked me for help. Can you put my syllabus up? And it was one of those mimeograph things. I'm like, so
We're supposed to cut it short.
are we over time?
I don't know, Steve.
I think lunch is
Yeah.
happening now.
It is lunchtime, so you can wrap up at whatever pace you want.
Yeah.
Not a high pressure situation.
Let me put my email address on the board, on the screen, and then if anybody has questions, please reach out. Any suggestions? I'll give you credit, maybe, or you'll be one of those people I say I can't attribute.
Yeah, I've long suspected that I might have an original thought or two up in there.
Yes, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. What advice would you have for a person who works in the classroom, loves video games, and has like been involved with them personally my whole life?
Right.
I'm like into it. I can code a little. I can But I've never, my career has all been education and my fun has all been video games. How the hell did we get them to meet each other?
It took me a while.
That's what I'm.
First I talked to students about it,
Okay,
and I found that they had common interests.
okay.
And I think that was one of the most important things, was the common interest. And then I would just talk after class with students, I'd be like, oh, you mentioned that you played this game. What'd you do at this part, and what'd you think of this? And we just started, so then I said, you know what, let's start having 10-minute discussions for anybody who wants to talk about video games inside of the class.
Okay.
Because you say you don't understand the story,
Yeah.
or even history, as somebody mentioned. Hamlet's all about history.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what do you teach?
I'm a building sub, so I teach everyone. That school is my laboratory, right?
Right, okay, so that's good. So then what you do is you take that discussion of the game itself and you start pulling the students into a learning discussion about it. I think the main thing you need to do is find out what learning outcomes you might be able to get from video games. What is it that you want to teach, and how can video games supplement it? So here, initially, I'm teaching students all about fiction. So how do I teach them fiction when they think fiction is something that it's foreign to them when it's not?
Right.
So I come up with a game. I do a poll. I do a lot of polling. What games have you played? What's that?
They think fiction is foreign for them?
Yeah, because they don't think they don't read. So they see fiction as stories.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what I tell them is fiction is almost everything that comes out of your mouth, first of all.
Sure.
And it's
Every game
also
we play. Yeah.
every story you watch, everything. So I did TV too.
Mhm.
Anything that gets them interested. And of course, where you have to be careful is when they start talking more about the entertainment and less about the narrative.
Yes.
So, and that's what you're there for. Otherwise, let it happen organically and watch as one student teaches the other about what the story means. And like, ask them about Hamlet and what Laertes' character is like, and they kind of hesitate. But you ask them the character in Final Fantasy, what's their role? And they go, well, no, he's the bad guy. No, he's not. You just think. And they start getting into amazing debates, which is exactly what we want them to do with literature.
Sephiroth did nothing wrong.
Right, exactly. So,
Yeah.
you can delete everything.
Cool.